Hello, everyone. Welcome to Uplift HR Webinar. I'm Serap Zel from Uplift. I'm happy to have you all here because today we will be talking about one of the most exciting and challenging topics in the world of talent acquisition, which is finding and hiring people in emerging markets. So I have an incredible guest with me today, Rob Lamb. Rob is an experienced TA leader with a global experience in the different markets and building high-performing teams. Rob, great to have you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And we also thanks to all of you joining us today. We want this webinar be more interactive, so drop your notes on the chat box, and as well as we will be here sharing some practical insights that you can apply immediately. And of course, share your thoughts and recommendations with us too. So, Rob, let's start with your professional background and your experience a little bit, then we can jump to our topics.
Sounds good. I'll make the introduction as concise as possible. So everybody, thank you for joining. You all can see some of my experience on the screen. If I summarize it for all of you, I think from a career and life perspective, it's all characterized by just really simply being open-minded to the opportunities that have been put in front of me and aiming to maximize and do my absolute best every minute of each day and hoping the outcome would be good. And so we've been very fortunate to have lived in 8 countries and worked on what I think are some of the biggest talent challenges we've had seen in the last decade. So that's a quick introduction to me.
That's great. Thanks, Rob. And you have done a great experience in different companies as well. So we love to hear some best practices. And I would like to jump to our topics quickly. But we always talk about this emerging markets, each and every company. And I was thinking that it would be great to clarify that emerging market definition and concept at the beginning, because every company that we also work together as Uplift seems like defining emerging markets differently, like sometimes Latin America, sometimes Middle East, sometimes Asia. So how do you define emerging markets?
I haven't had a lot of prep on this question, but I'll try to articulate it as clearly as possible. So,
Yeah.
when I reflect on my career, I've been very fortunate to be in emerging markets most of my career, places like China, obviously now the Middle East, but also markets like Thailand, etc.
Mm-hmm.
What I see as patterns, just off the top of my head, in those markets are 3 sort of key things. One is you see a huge spike in the economics of that country. And that's things like government initiatives to drive businesses forward, an interest in the region, things like that. So you see, the economics in spotlight. China, 2008 and forward was a good example. Then you start to see a real mismatch of talent demand and talent supply in those markets. So that can be characterized by bigger companies moving with the economics, setting up shop in those countries, and then finding they have a huge demand for software engineers, heads of talent, whatever the job is,
Yes.
and not necessarily finding those things to the standard that they would like. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't exist. And often it can mean that those companies are looking in the wrong places, but that's possibly an entirely separate conversation. And then I think last but not least, then you start to see talent flows. You start to see talent mobility. So you start to see a big cross-border flow of talent into those markets, following the positive economics. So that's my really quick 3 bullets. I'm not sure if they're
That's
right.
great. Yeah, no, I definitely agree on this talent demand and supply balance that makes actually defining the emerging markets totally, and the economical indicators, etc. And also, I always say that hiring isn't just about filling positions, it's about fueling business growth, especially in emerging markets, which is very much aligned with the business strategy as well. So, because in these markets, industries are evolving rapidly compared to other markets. So, hiring the right people can literally make or break a company's ability to scale, right? So, especially in the companies that you have worked, I think you have seen that directly too. And we have shared here that according to the McKinsey report, companies that align talent acquisition with their business strategy are 2.5 times more likely to outperform their peers financially. So, From your experience, Rob, what are the best practices for making sure talent acquisition isn't just an HR function, but a real driver for business success?
I might be a little bit esoteric here, but I will get into the nitty gritty as well. So try to
Yes,
stay with me. And for the group, drop questions in, certainly feedback,
exactly.
and feel free to disagree. Um, I think the first thing is you have to start with the right mindset when you're a TA or a talent leader or even an HR leader. I think we have to change the mindset of the function to seeing ourselves as front office employees, to use sort of the financial services terminology. We really need to make sure that not only do we have a seat at the table, but we're at that table and we are driving things forward from a strategic perspective. So, so how do we do that? So then we think about how do you operationalize the mindset. I think what's really important is you have to seek to deeply understand the strategy. And I've seen it lots of times is that, TA functions in emerging markets have been like Burger King. A hiring manager shows up, they order something and they show up at the window and expect to get it, right? It's not strategic. It's very reactive.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? So we have to get into our leadership teams and seek to deeply understand it. That's like reading the corporate strategy, reviewing the slides, taking notes, asking questions. You have to bring a level of curiosity to the table in order to show not only an innate desire to learn, but also the drive and effort to understand. Within that, you have to see yourself as a business owner, not an employee, but a business owner, and you have to act accordingly. So I actually once had a business leader ask me in a reasonably large meeting, so have you memorized the corporate strategy yet? And, there's a very awkward silence because, I'd done a lot of reading, but I certainly hadn't memorized it. So like you have to deeply understand how your business functions and wins. I mean, actually, or doesn't win as a result. So look, next within that, look at the pillars, deeply understand the key results within that corporate strategy, and then ask yourself, like, what can I do as a business leader to drive it forward? So if you're leading a TA function, if you're leading a broader talent function or a people function, we have to know what our role is in driving forward, or what we're able to do to drive that corporate strategy forward. So I'll give everybody an example so we don't stay in theory. So I remember in 2024, as a business, we were really deeply focused on engagement with our customer group. So our corporate strategy really spoke to deep customer engagement, which was super cool. But some people said, well, what do we do to engage our customers as a TA function? Like, I'm not out there, I'm not the software, I'm not the SaaS product.
Very
Like, what do I
indirect
do?
type of impact, right? So that the people think,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly right. So what we did as a team is we sat down as a leadership team and we said, what does engagement mean for our function? How does it translate? And what we came to understand really quickly was that engagement was a function of experience, and really the consistency of experience and the stability of the experience that we could create as a TA function. So we knew there was three key areas that we could impact or have reflected in our TA strategy. So specifically, that was for us, our candidates, our hiring managers, and our team, or the TA team as itself. Now, remember as well, each of these groups are also Careem customers, right? So we often forget that if we create a bad experience, particularly if any of you work in tech, if I create a bad experience for any one of you, it's very easy for you to walk out of the building and just delete the app, if it's an app-enabled business. So we have to understand our direct relationship there. So look, so what did we specifically do? The first thing we wanted to understand is, like, what does great experiences, or what do they look like for our candidates? We wanted to be able to really hear our customers who are our candidates. So what we did is we implemented an NPS model, and we did that almost immediately. We made it really simple. We made it really easy to use, and we made it short. Nobody wants to answer 500 questions on a Monday morning, right? We then operationalized the data. So then we took the data and the analytics to review, and we literally sat down as a leadership team. We came to deeply understand the patterns and what our candidates loved. I use the word love because like is boring. If you're going to create a great business, you want to have an emotional attachment. You want to really over deliver on what your candidates or your clients or your people expect from you.
Yeah.
And then what we did is we took those patterns and we actively sat down with our whole team and we said, here's what you're doing a great job of. We sought to catch our people doing what they were doing right. We didn't look for what they were doing wrong. And we really promoted great behaviors in our team so that they could create great experiences for our candidates. Now, I won't go super long form on this, but in a similar vein, we did something similar for our hiring managers. And then we did a similar thing for our people. And often people say to me, like, well, why do you include your people as a customer? Well, because as a leader, I index very heavily on if I am doing a great job, then my people will be really happy and they will do a great job as well. So that's a really important thing, is to survey your people and be like, okay, well, what am I doing wrong? What can I do better? Because their work is a reflection of your work. So holistically, we focused on consistency, continuous improvement to drive alignment with the key actions in alignment with the corporate strategy. Long answer, but I hope it
Yeah,
covers what
no,
you're looking for.
that's great. And of course, if you have any questions, please let us know. But I really like how you describe like getting candidates' feedback and understanding their needs and integrating that to the business processes. I think that's really smart. And also, you were talking, I was thinking about this trend that I see in the market, that as we are working on some of HR roles for the TA or HRBP or head of HR roles, and I see that the HR head of HR, like CHRR roles, are mostly now becoming the people who have this TA background, because I think talent acquisition area is definitely the area that you can integrate business strategy, understand what business needs, and with that mindset, as you mentioned, and experience, you can definitely be the next HR leader in your organization. As far as I see, that's a trend.
I can only hope for such good news for myself, but yes, agree.
Exactly. And so, Rob, let's move on a little bit. Emerging market challenges, and I would like to include our listeners to this Mentimeter. We would like to ask you as well, our listeners, what are your hiring challenges in emerging markets? You can scan the code here and also just answer one question with the options in those challenges. But Rob, while we are looking for the answers, I would love to hear from your perspective as well.
The sort of the strategies for effective leadership hiring in some of these emerging markets.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think the answer is often accurate or often very obvious, but we
Yes.
don't always get it. So look, I think it goes without saying that workforce planning is critical for organizations at the moment. I think when you have emerging markets, I think it's natural for people to be a little chaotic and they hire as fast as they can. Often that hiring is directed at the loudest voice rather than the most important voice. And so we end up with organizations that are kind of like these Franken organizations with random people bolted on all over the place, and they don't always work very well. So I think the first thing is making sure that your leadership hiring is a function of clear planning and alignment skills,
Yeah.
which is hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but we've got to get people around a table and have hard conversations. So specifically, who are those people? I think it's the cross-functional partnership between your leadership team. That could be your founders, that could be your executive team, people, business partners, of course, and talent acquisition. So it's critical to first get all those people aligned and then correctly go through a gap analysis. Again, it sounds very formal. It doesn't have to be. It can be a lightweight meeting, but we have to have those conversations. And that's to ensure that we know what our real business need is before we go to market.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds silly, right? That everybody just goes, yeah, hire an executive. And you're like, okay, and everybody runs away from the room, and we fail to say, hold on, like, is there an incumbent? Do we have a succession plan? Do we have any great people in the business that might be able to step into this? And what does the business look like in 6 or 12 months? Do we really need this job?
Mm-hmm.
I think your next step for anybody is take the time to do in logic or data-based role definition.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very critical, right? So first of all, you should know what you want, right? So then and it's going to be much easier to define. So while we are talking about that, the people answer this question. So let's see what they think. Let me share my screen of Mentimeter. Just a sec here. Can you see? So basically, people say that, especially in emerging markets, the first challenge comes with the high competition for top talent, which is, I think, very true because most of industries are hiring for the same markets. So for that high skilled talent. And the second comes with actually two things: low response rate from best fit candidates. I think that's the result of high competition, right, Rob?
This is an interesting one. This is quite common.
Yeah.
Let me speak to this quickly. This is a really interesting one. So I think coming back to the role definition is important. That role definition then has to cascade down into countries, because if you have a mobility, of course, this region is reasonably mobile, then it has to cascade into companies and then skills, of course. But I think what's important in these two items that the group has called out is we have to take a data-centric approach to what success looks like. So before we even engage with candidates, before we start to compete for top talent, we actually have to think about this on an organizational level. What does top talent actually look like for us? And I'll give you an example. Last year, we actually did a big piece of work around this, and we use a lot of AI within our team. We don't use fancy tools. We've built a lot of it ourselves. We're very fortunate to have super smart people. And what we did is we actually took 3 years of data. Now, you don't have to be a software engineer to do this work. You just have to be somebody who can look at patterns in data. And of course, even if you're not good at that, you can now use an LLM model to tell you what the patterns are. So nobody has any excuses anymore.
No.
So we took that 3 years of data and we were able to augment it. We tidied it up. We cleaned it up with some LinkedIn profiles. We filled gaps just to make sure that our data was really clean. Mm-hmm. And what we looked for was patterns in performance. And so what we wanted to understand is before we go to market, before we have low response rates, before we compete for talent, what does high performance even look like? Now, what you'll all hopefully relate with is each time anybody on this call opens a job, whether you're the opener or the person who is opening it, we hear the same thing. Oh, I want somebody from this FANG company, or I want somebody from this Big Four consulting firm. So we find consistently that there's still a huge demand for profile.
Yeah.
Profile's easy. I know what, quote unquote, I know what I'm buying. Mm-hmm. What we found in our data very quickly is there was not a correlation between profile and performance. So what that means is, to the audience's commentary, maybe we were going out and not to attack any companies, right? But maybe we were going to Facebook or Apple or Netflix or Google, right? And we were having a low response rate. Fine. Yeah. The question we should ask ourselves is, do we care? And in our instance, we didn't have a correlation with those companies and high performance. So the point is, we were having a low response rate. We were inserting effort and burning calories on work that is not material, that did not make sense, that was not going to yield the result we wanted anyway. Then high competition. Of course, there's high competition because everybody's doing the same thing. Everybody's looking for the same profiles. Like, hey, have we got anybody from Google? Yeah. If you go into the data and you're effective at assessing it, what you'll learn very quickly is high performance in every company rarely looks like people from those companies. Not that there's anything wrong with those companies, because they're amazing companies. But that doesn't mean that their performance at Facebook, Apple, Netflix, or Google translates to high performance in your company. So my point to some of these challenges is, in many cases, they're not challenges. The challenge is you haven't looked at your data very well, and you actually don't know where you should be sourcing. When you find out, a lot of these things go away very quickly.
Yeah, no, that's a great recap of this results. Thanks, Rob. And I see a few comments from our audience. Gumasi Riza mentioned, one of my most hiring challenge is to determine candidates' passion for the job. Most candidates looks at the paycheck most. I think that comes with the competition as well, right? So that's because one candidate, I remember if, we were working with one of the robotics company, and the candidates that we presented got the offer at the end, but that candidate got the offer from 8 different companies at the same time. So then, I mean, what a nice feeling, of course, from candidate's perspective, but at the same time, it's a difficult decision, right? What to do. And I guess they will be checking other criteria as well in this case, not only the career opportunity, but paycheck or location or whatever more criteria is coming in. And the other comment is I think managing expectation is also a huge challenge, reality of the market versus what our teams expect. Fawad mentioned that as well. I guess the managing expectations of both parts, right? The candidate expectation and the business expectation, making sure it's aligning. I think that's the definitely real challenge. Okay, thanks for your comments. And I think this is a great summary. And I would like to come back to this data and analytics, Rob, again, because that is so important, especially in emerging markets, as we are talking about competition quite a bit. So do you have any other examples of this data analytics that you used in talent acquisition and that you have seen some good success at the end?
I think so. So I think, again, without stating the obvious, but maybe going back to your first question, we can often drown in the data and we have no idea why we are there. And so I think it's important to first go back to the corporate strategy to understand what data actually helps me understand the work I should be doing or gives me a key indicator on if I'm doing it well. And so that's really, really important. And this is a little bit of a confusing analogy, but anybody who's worked in my teams has probably heard this 100 times and they'll all collectively roll their eyes. But I think it's really important first to ask 2 questions. Are we doing the right things? And are we doing them right? And this is, people are like, what are you talking about? Particularly if English is your second language, people are like, this is very confusing. What are you talking about?
Process, yeah.
Yeah. And then, again, people switch off. So I think what this means is first, are we doing the right things? Is again, if we think about our corporate strategy, the right things are the input metrics, the specific things that I have to do each day to be successful in my job to help achieve my team or my function goals. So if we think about this within talent acquisition, this can be something like how many interviews of really good candidates do I have? Now, at Careem, one of the things that we found is that for our team members, when we think about tech specifically, if they were doing less than about 40 interviews a month, they were probably not hitting the goals that we had as a team. But our high performers consistently were doing 42, 44, et cetera, interviews on a monthly basis. And so we saw a direct correlation to that input metric. And that helped us drive our corporate strategy forward, right? Because that correlated to the amount of hires that we needed to make on a person by person basis on a monthly basis. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important first, am I doing the right things? And if you're not, well, just fix it, right? Like a lot of the time it's very straightforward to understand, am I doing, is the behavior or the habit I have right now, is it correct or not? Mm-hmm. Then is it the data also will inform, how do you do your job better? And so that's, am I doing these things right? And so, for example, if I'm doing 100 interviews a month, but I'm only hiring 2 people or 1 person,
based off
hiring the right people, or you have no idea how to interview, right? Mm-hmm. So it starts to help us with the effectiveness of our people as well. It helps us coach and develop them. So I think the data is only a function of what you deeply need to learn as a leader. Yeah. And that doesn't have to be all the data. It just has to be the right data.
Yeah, totally. And also, I remember one of our clients, for example, the tech client, they look at their the hiring results, like which candidates they have selected and how many interviews they did to select that person and who were the interviewers. Because it's easy data to get, right? So you have all the information. And then they look at the hired candidates' performance in the next 3 years. And from that information coming back to the quality of the decisions of interviewers, and as well as like how many interview runs they should have ideally to select the right person. So when we look at all these data points, I mean, you can make really informed decisions and select the right interviewers, design the process well and select the right candidate for your business, and which will impact also your retention rates, because that's a never ending cycle. If you don't select the right people, they will leave at some point and you have to replace people again, and it goes like that, right?
Totally. I think that's a really important call out. I think just to add, one of the things that my team has done a great job of is when we look at the processes, let's say you have 5 interviews in your process, which is a great number, by the way. More than that, you see diminishing returns, just fun fact. But when you look at that, if you step back and you're like, okay, what do I own? Like, what can I control in that process? In many cases, the TA team is only doing the first interview. We only own 20% of the outcome. Yet all these metrics are dropped on TA, and you're like, hold on, everybody, hold on. And I think the call out is important. We need to be able to measure how well our business is doing at not only creating great experiences, but assessing effectively, such that we can lean in and help enable and develop our business as a whole. And I do think that's the role of the TA team, is how are we helping people develop as interviewers? How do we help people select better? How do we really become a partner in that process is important as well.
Exactly. Yeah, I would like to ask to our audience at this point, if you would rank your company's data capabilities, data analytics capabilities in talent acquisition, like how would you rate from 1 to 5? 1 is the lowest capability and 5 is the highest capability. It could be 3, 4, 5 as well. I mean, but can you just write your rank and the comments so we can see like how is the capabilities in the companies from talent acquisition perspective? So we are all learning here from each other. While we are waiting for that, Rob, I think I would like to, as time is running up, so before we wrap, I would like to ask you one thing, like a big question, maybe the last big question. If you had to give just one piece of advice to talent leaders navigating this today's hiring landscape in emerging markets, what would it be? And you can give a few more, of course. I said one, but
I think there's something to be said for concise communication. I think it goes back to your first question, which is first, you have to believe you are an owner. You have to be clear about what you can control. You have to have that mindset. If you're just showing up and you're just doing a job, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's less material. Now, the second thing I like is when I thought about my leadership team, I was always thinking about how do I develop them as business owners rather than just managers or whatever. I want this team to think like it's their business. So I think the second component is think about this as your business. And that should help you define what would you or should you do as a leader. Often we forget this. We just think we're doing a job, we're being told what to do. I think that type of thinking is correct at best. And then next, I think for leaders, but also if you're in a TA job, truly differentiate. I was told once by a great strategy person, there's only 2 types of strategy, value or true differentiation. And value is essentially you're competing on price, right? No one wants to compete on price. Or maybe they do, I don't. But what I think is really fun for this group as individuals, but also for the businesses that you represent, is sit down with a pen and a tea or coffee or whatever and think, what makes me truly, or how will I truly differentiate in this market? What am I going to do different? And we have to know the same thing about the businesses in which we work. And what does that mean? So it's like we sit down and we think, okay, what are we outstandingly great at as an organization? What is it? Now, you don't have to do this on your own. Pull in peers, leaders, people who you truly respect, and ask them this question, like, what do you think we're really great at as a company? For Careem, I think we were amazingly great at hiring amazingly great people. Mm-hmm. And then sitting in meetings, it's super exciting to spend time with those people. So be clear, and this is different for every org. If you ask 50 people, what are they going to say you're amazing at? And you should index on that. Go to market with that. Don't compete on price unless that's your only thing. Compete on what makes you special. And that goes for you if you're an individual recruiter, or it goes for you as an organization. Now, at the same time, you have to know what you're really poor at as well. You should be very mindful of it. It is okay to call out, we are terrible at whatever, X. So you have to bring your outstanding great to life to attract the people who will thrive in your organization. If you're really clear on your differentiation, you will naturally attract people who will thrive.
Yeah.
It happens through osmosis. And that can be, some people might call it your EVP or whatever. Now, final piece, at the same time, you have to be clear that candidates will also know what you're bad at. We have blind, we have like Glassdoor, we have all these things that it's very clear what people are upset about. So make sure you know what you're great at. Be very prepared with an answer about what you're doing to improve your weaknesses as well.
Great advice. Yeah, thank you. And I would like to just read a few questions and comments from our audience. Günsu mentioned that I think everyone looks for a rock star, but generally people don't give a chance to passionate but less experienced candidates. If we start to give chance to potential, things can change. That's true as well, especially in emerging markets. So, Günsu. Tolga asked a question. Do you think all talent strategies will change with AI? Will there be a need for recruiters in the coming years? Famous question, Rob. What do you think?
Responding to Soraya.
Okay.
1 sec. Yes, there will be recruiters in future, and I'll give you again, try to be concise. We have to ask our question, what will we be left with? So when we think about how AI has evolved, and I spend most of my day working with different LLM models, we've started to see chipping away at the lowest order work, right? We no longer need to look for white space in calendars. We don't need to write emails very well. We can just throw gobbledygook into an LLM and refine it, right? So the lower order tasks that are easy to understand will disappear. Those will no longer exist. What does that mean? It means that you will have to upskill and more complex, more interesting, more challenging roles will become available, right? But what will make them interesting or challenging? The innate humanness of them. So as it stands right now, we don't have an artificial intelligence that can make people feel felt.
Yeah.
Our ability to connect with other people. And what's the function of that? Deep listening, being present. Very hard skills, right? That are in very low supply at the moment because everybody is looking at their phone every 16 seconds. Yeah. But the more you can help somebody on the other side of a screen or on the other side of a table feel genuinely you care, like you're hearing them, AI has no means of taking that as yet. So be great at connecting with people. There was a question in the chat about the candidate experience and building trust. Yeah. Critical skill. If you can do those things really well, you will differentiate your personal strategy very quickly. And at the same time, of course, you have to become comfortable with our new carbon workmate, our new non-bipedal workmate, artificial intelligence. So those two things would be critical for me for TA into the future.
Exactly. Especially the strategic part of TA, I definitely need human touch. Soraya, I think you answered to Soraya's question, but she's also say, I also find panel interviews fantastic in order to involve stakeholders apart from hiring manager. Totally agree. When you have internal consensus based on various points of view, it maximizes the chance of success of the new hire. So that's great. So we have seen some ratings, some lows, some highs as well, which is good to see. And also a question from Sam. How do you handle hiring in a new market where your company isn't well known? What are your go-to ways to build interest and trust with candidates? That's a really good question. So Rap, do you have any idea on that or any suggestion?
Yeah, I think it's in line with what we're talking about. So Sam, it's a really good question. I think what we need to do first is understand differentiation, right? So you have to understand, like, what do you as a recruiter represent differently than what the market is presenting? Please don't be another transactional recruiter. Seek to deeply understand the person on the other side of the proverbial table. That will differentiate you right away. The more you become strong and skilled at defining wants and needs for a person, and that's like really straightforward work, it's listening, asking what is this person really telling me, and asking 2 to 3 follow-up questions to define the need. So that's you. The second thing is, of course, you're asking people to join an organization that they know nothing about. It's very similar. What is your company great at? Like, why do people care? It can't be comp. Please don't make it comp.
Yeah.
It might work for market entry. It does not work sustainably. So when somebody walks in the door on their first day, imagine like what are they going to be shocked or what Apple used to call surprised and delighted by. So an example of surprise and delight for I'll show my age briefly is remember I don't know if you all remember but when Apple had the thumbprint recognition when you could just touch your phone and it would unlock. That like blew people's minds at the time. They were like, "Whoa, it understands it. It reads my thumb." Now that only surprised and delighted people for about 5 minutes. And then Apple went, oh dear, now we have to think of something else that's really cool. The same goes for your brand. What's immediately going to shock people that they're going to go, I'm super excited that this is really cool. Google did this with free food, et cetera, et cetera. What's your point of differentiation, true differentiation in a market? You don't have something, work with your leadership to get something, but think about it. It only has to be one or two things that will draw people away from an environment where they might not be loving life and introduce them to a thing that they might really love.
Yeah, definitely. Creating kind of elevator pitch is also a really nice idea, right? To for all interviewers, present the company in a consistent way during interviews. So great. So we have one more question. Does background experience in the position defines the candidate as the best fit for the position? Do you find creativity as key element in hiring despite of previous work experience?
I think first, it depends on the position. So, for example, I wouldn't want a doctor operating on me with no background experience.
Yeah. If it's a technical role, right? Highly
Yes,
specialized role.
yes. But there is a vast array of jobs that can be done if people have the correct skills and competencies, not exactly the same job, but it's complex to define those skills and competencies and therefore fit the person into the job. You need a pretty complex hiring environment to hire based on skill. So the short answer to your question is background experience matters in hyper specialized jobs, but for a vast majority of the global workforce, it's going to come down to the skills and experiences the person brings to the job. The challenge you will have though is how do you define accurately the skills and experiences without bias, which is very hard.
Yeah.
So that's the answer. Highly specialized, yes. Vast majority, no, not really. And then do you find creativity as a key element in hiring despite previous work experience? I think creativity is a critical skill for the future.
Yeah.
But that criticality is a function of the logic by which the person is applying the creativity. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Whether people are assessing on it, I don't know.
Yes, it's hard to assess that part actually. So the one question from Hawa: how is technologies such as AI, data analytics, and digital platforms shaping recruitment and workforce planning in emerging markets? We touched to that a little bit, but especially the technology piece, maybe we can talk a little bit more about it. We talk about data analytics.
Yeah, I think we're almost skipping in this region. I can't speak for others immediately, but in this region, I think we're almost skipping a generation, if that makes sense. So we have a workforce right now where you have a lot of people who are incumbent in senior jobs, right? You have an aging workforce in an executive level. And now you're starting to see emerging talent who is a different generation who has grown up with very tech heavy, a very tech heavy life. And so I think it shapes this next generation drastically. Like if I think about my kids, for example, they will have always known AI their whole life, which
Yeah.
I don't even know what that means. That freaks me out if I'm honest. So will it change and shape 100%? That means that for each of you, you have to influence an AI centric future state organization. You need to be partnering with leadership to be very clear that the organizations that are not successful at integrating AI will not be organizations for very long. And that sounds dramatic, but I believe it to be true.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And also, especially in sourcing part of talent acquisition, there are many AI tools on the market at the moment. Of course, there are pros and cons of each tool, but that shows like an appetite for growth in this business in recruitment. So we use as Uplift, we use a couple of AI tools as well. They are not really the perfect solution, like the only solution which helps us sourcing the right candidates, but is a good addition as far as I see. But yeah, thank you so much for all the audience as well for the questions and comments. And it has been an incredible conversation, Rob. And I really would like to thank you And because there are many things that we can touch too in this topic. I was thinking that we can even do like the second and third rounds of webinars on different topics. But it has been really a pleasure having you in our webinar. Thanks for joining, and thanks to all of our web audience as well for joining us.
The audience, great questions.
Yeah, that's great. So, of course, please connect with me and Rob on LinkedIn. We would love to keep this conversation going as we are all learning and in this evolving talent acquisition world. But before you go, drop a word on the chat about how you are feeling about this session today. That will be also good feedback for us. And then we can improve next time. See you next time, and happy hiring, everyone, in emerging markets.